The birth of Resident Evil dates back to a request within the offices of the developer Capcom. There, a young Shinji Mikami was given the task of making a scary game based on the acclaimed Japanese movie Sweet Home. Shinji Mikami is a Japanese video game designer who grew up in Yamaguchi Prefecture, Shogoku region. As a teenager, he developed an interest in horror movies. This influenced later development of the survival horror genre in video games. He is known for video games such as Resident Evil from 1996, Dino Crisis 1999, Resident Evil 4 2005, The Evil Within 2014, and his latest production Ghostwire Tokyo 2021. Mikami joined Capcom in 1989 and started working as a game planner. With inspiration from the Sweet Home video game for the NES in 1989, Mikami's project took shape in 1996 Biohazard, better known here in the Americas as
Resident Evil.
After the success of Resident Evil, he was appointed producer of the sequel. Despite the moderate success that Shinji Mikami had obtained in his previous participation, his path to the fame began with a horror video game that would then end consolidating a new genre within the world of video games, the survival horror genre. Today, there are many video games of this genre such as The Evil Within Saga, Outlast, Dead Space,
Redefined.
Metro Exodus,
Life built on a lie, born out of truth.
the Silent Hill Saga, and of course, the best survival horror saga, Resident Evil.
I will show her the path.
What is it?
Look out! It's a monster!
There was also the influence of a famous PC game called Alone in the Dark, which was based on a famous Japanese movie called Night of the Living Dead by George Romero. But Biohazard has certainly qualities that set it apart from other video games with similar themes and became the most representative video game of its genre. Released on March 22 in 1996 for the PlayStation console and later for Sega Saturn, Biohazard was a game less methodical than Alone in the Dark and with more action elements. The characters were generated in 3D by means of polygons and moved in pre-rendered scenarios. This game would become a commercial success, selling 2,750,000 copies worldwide. It is not that Mikami copied all the elements of Sweet Home. It is that he had been expressly asked to make his new game a kind of legacy of this last one. Sweet Home and Resident Evil share some elements such as the mentioned settings, the terrifying enemies, the inventory system, the puzzle challenge, and the narration through notes that you collect. But not everything is an exact copy of Sweet Home. When Shinji Mikami properly analyzed all the strength of this game, he decided he wanted to go further with Resident Evil. Thus, he gave players a terrifying experience never seen before. In this way, the Japanese creator made players face their fears, feeling at all times the lurking of something terrible so that they would finally end up shooting a grotesque monster at the right time. He was not satisfied with just making people fear, but he wanted the danger to be perceived as something real. It was in this way that a universe full of creepy environments, fearsome enemies, and endearing characters that have accompanied several generations of players over the years was created. The game, which was released for the NES console by the directors of the legendary Ghosts and Goblins, Tokuro Fujiwara, proved to be sufficiently influential that several years later, Fujiwara himself invited the studio to make a remake for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. From there, returning to the house plagued by supernatural dangers, the idea of Resident Evil was born, which passed through several hands and ideas until it became the 3D game with pre-rendered backgrounds that most of us already know. But why the name Resident Evil? That was because what was happening in their basement in Japan, they decided to call the game Biohazard, and with that idea already completely closed, they continued working until it was time to tell their American friends what they had in their hand. They were all happy, celebrating and drinking the most out of the excellent result of their effort to Biohazard, except for a small problem. They could not use the name Biohazard in the United States. There was also a music band that was called like that, and also a game for MS-DOS recently released also carried that name. To solve this little inconvenience, the best thing they could think of was to organize a contest within the marketing department. Everyone would say a name, and the one with the most votes would be the winner. And since the original game came from the movie Sweet Home, and the remake turned into its own franchise was also based on a haunted house, someone came up with the idea and called it Resident Evil. Resident Evil is an excellent title for a horror game that even today, these two words, when you hear them immediately, comes to the mind that you are in a place where your nightmares come to life, and that among the darkness lure indescribable hellish creatures. Over the years, the success of Resident Evil has been so great that it has been included in the saga, manga, novels, movies, and collectibles such as action figures, most of them developed by Capcom and created by Shinji Mikami. The last count that I personally have found on the web dates from October 26 from 2022, it was 121 million copies of video games have been sold around the world. As in another media, the plot resolves around the same conflict, the bioterrorist threat, a dangerous virus that is spread by a mistake or intentionally by the Umbrella Corporation. This by infecting humans or animals, transform them into amorphous and monster beings. Most of the incidents begin during or after the initial big destructive wave. In this situation, the protagonist, usually Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Leon S. Kennedy, Claire Redfield, Ethan Winter, and some others, must survive and find a way to escape while facing zombies and monsters, not only born from contact with the dead, but also others that have escaped from the development laboratories of Umbrella Corporation biological weapons created on purpose, such as the Tyrant, and host of biological weapons that the protagonist must overcome to escape. This gameplay of the video game is different in each title. Each video game has at least one small change in terms of gameplay. The first game had a camera angle with fixed shots in 3D that helped to cause fears and uncertainty. Clear examples of this are the first three games: Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, and Resident Evil 3, and Resident Evil Code Veronica, or the Outbreak Saga 1 and 2, and Resident Evil 0. Since the arrival of Resident Evil 4 in 2005, the third person is mostly preserved in change to a view over the shoulder, while saying goodbye to the survival horror genre and close to the action. With the arrival of Resident Evil 5 in 2009, this was further accentuated, giving even more importance to the action than horror. However, with the arrival of the title Resident Evil Revelation in 2012 and Resident Evil Revelation 2 in 2015, this change giving more importance to the horror with more leisurely gameplay, being able to aim and walk at the same time. Then came Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil Village with the first-person gameplay, but it is also worth mentioning that previously there were already games with this type of gameplay, such as the three survival games that include Resident Evil Survivor, Resident Evil Survivor 2, Resident Evil Code Veronica, and Resident Evil Dead Aim. But apart the two Chronicles games, Umbrella Chronicles and Darkside Chronicles, where the gameplay is third person but with the difference that it is on rails. This means the player always follows a fixed path. But not everything has been beautiful for Capcom with the Resident Evil saga. With the arrival of Resident Evil 4 and 5 and 6, the company began to fall into a tailspin as the franchise was leaving the survival horror genre, taking more importance to the moments of action and shooting everywhere, leaving behind those emotions of suspense, fear and horror that provided us with the previous installment. The arrival of Resident Evil 7, the franchise began to return to the path to which we always loved. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is certainly not one of the best, but it is a title that has been able to return its greatness to this veteran line, doing so with important mechanical changes that this time have not gone against its spirits and its survival essence. Undoubtedly, a game that has been able to reunite many broken relationships that we, the fans, had with the franchise. Resident Evil Village has further strengthened the relationship of fans with the franchise. And what about the remakes that have been giving hard, and apparently Capcom has returned to draw the lottery with these games? Given that remakes like Resident Evil 4 and its Ada 1 DLC have had an excellent acceptance by us the fans, we will be surprised if the company has news of a new remake in the future. And well people, this is the story of the origin of the best video game saga as the survival horror genre. And you already knew it? Write me in the comments, and if you feel lazy, just leave me a like. And if you like the video, I invite you to subscribe. Any action you choose will help me to the YouTube algorithm to take into account my videos and recommend them. I will be uploading videos about this saga one per week, so beware. For my part, that's all I can say. Thanks for seeing my video. Auf Wiedersehen!
Yeah.